Welcome to another exciting edition of the Parental Playbook Podcast. Joining us today from Montclair, New Jersey, a very special guest, Dr. Brennan is here with us, a sports psychologist by profession, and he's going to help us unpack some of the many issues that young people are dealing with now, especially when you throw in all the different pressure points that now exist with big-time college sports, and even for the lesser Division II, Division III college sports, because, man, Doctor, young kids don't realize, it's so much more fun to play than to have a really nice sweatsuit, maybe at the University of Alabama. I mean, if you tell a kid, hey, you can go over here to, Furman or Campbell College or Miles College and play, man, you're really going to enjoy it a whole lot more than staying home when the Crimson Tide travels or not playing at all. So talk to me a little bit about helping kids now, putting this whole recruiting business into perspective.
Yeah, and Mark, you can call me Ben anytime you want.
Okay.
Whatever you want is cool with me. No, it's such an important thing to talk about at this point for people who have kids who are playing high school sports and college sports. I think there's so much pressure and there's so much exposure, even more so, than even maybe 5 years ago or 10 years ago, even, where there's this whole idea that you got to get to that highest level. And then now you add in the NIL money stuff and, what kind of pressure that must be, especially for the really like elite athletes, in football, basketball, and even in some of the other sports as well. And it's you can understand why kids feel the need to do that, to try to go to a place that's the biggest offer, that has the most brand recognition and all that kind of thing. And I've coached football at the high school level and then the youth level and lacrosse and basketball. And what you said earlier is so true. I think what happens is athletes and their families, parents want to be proud of their kids. They want to puff out their chest. My kid goes to so and so and is on the team and stuff. But, going to those places, it is tough to get on the field or on the court, and you don't realize how many, other athletes you're going up against until you even go to one of those little like talent camps, and you realize that this is a small speck of the people and you see, wow, I'm not even the best guy here or the best gal here, right? I mean, and that's all across the country. Everybody wants to play quarterback for Alabama, right?
Right.
Or wherever it is. And so, it's understandable, why they want to do that. And if you're getting offered money and things like that, it obviously is a bigger enticement. But I always say to I say to my own children and to the students that I've coached is, you got to go where the best fit is for you,
Right.
and I think you're right. I think you want to be on the field, you want to play,
Yeah.
who wants to be a great athlete in high school where you were probably one of the best players, around, and then to go and just practice and never playing games and just be a practice player. Right.
Yeah.
So I think, but some people see that as kind of, it's a hard pill to swallow. Like, I'm not quite at
Right.
that level, and he's going there, he's going to a certain place and he's making so and so NIL money or whatever. It's understandable. They compare themselves, right, to their peers, right?
Yes. And Ben, it's so interesting. I was talking to a young recent college grad yesterday who's headed into the field of sports psychology, and she touched on that very point. And we ended up terming it comparison culture,
Hmm.
right? And she said that's one of the most hurtful things a parent can do is compare their child to another, say on the team or on an opponent, and say, why aren't you working like that kid? So how do we help parents keep their expectations realistic? I think that's part of the rub here.
Right. Yeah, and that is super important, right? Is for the parents to have a realistic view. I mean, that's our job, right? We got to be a little bit more realistic and kind of rein them in a little bit. We always want to support them and we want to support their dreams, and we want them to go after big things, right? And things that they're excited about, and we want to support them, through any means we can. But yeah, as a parent, I think, most parents have never been in that situation. They didn't play Division I sports, at a big time school. Sometimes I meet parents, we have parents who have, who've been in those shoes, and they tend to be actually, you'd be surprised, they're the ones that are most realistic about it, and because they know how competitive it is. They know how short-lived it is, and that it's even worse than when they played now. It's even more difficult. And so I think that's something that we have to, this is why, your show is so important, is to help parents, get calibrated to what their kids are going up against,
Absolutely.
and try to balance. I want to support my child, but I also don't want to push them into something that, is just not going to happen for them. It just isn't.
Exactly. Exactly. So it's interesting. You said, you want to support them. So how do we get them to open up to us when they need that support? I know that was always my concern with my youngest, my hockey player, because I knew how mentally challenging hockey really is. Number one, it's physically demanding. But number two is if you don't have that confident spark, right, the game passes you by. If you stop to think, thereby you pucks in the back of your neck.
Keep
So,
propelling.
how do you get them to open up when they really need you the most?
Yeah, it's funny. I coached my son's fifth grade basketball team, and I'm always saying, you guys got to play basketball with confidence.
Right.
You got to play. You can't be thinking too much. You got to be out there, and you got to just play. Play with some abandon and play with some confidence and some swagger, as they say,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But I think, with a lot of kids, they'll give you opportunities to talk about things. And I think we as parents, I think what we have to be careful of is not stepping in too quickly. We have to listen first. We really got to be good listeners, which, it's kind of a change of our role, right? As they get older, we got to be more the consultant. We got to be, as opposed to, the coach or the person in charge. So we're trying to transition into that. I think, which, we have to listen, and we really have to get a clear sense of what they want and what they're struggling with and what's hard for them, and ask a lot of questions as opposed to giving advice, right away. Right.
Right.
And giving direction right away. And certainly that's true as they're, in their last couple of years of high school, and they're trying to figure out what they want to do. And then if they do decide to play in college, that, it becomes even more so. You want to, they have to take ownership of it, right? They,
Sure.
they're the ones that got to do the workouts at 6 o'clock in the morning, and they're the ones that risk the injuries and all that kind of stuff. So I think at first we have to listen first, and really, really give them a sense that we're listening and we care about what they have to say. Doesn't mean that we agree with everything. I think some
Right.
parents, like, mistake it that if you listen too much, that means you're agreeing with everything they say. And that's not the case, but I think, everybody wants to be heard, right? Everybody wants to,
Sure.
especially from their parent. It's so important to the kids that we know what they're going through, that we have some empathy for them.
Yeah. And Ben, I know you've worked with elite level athletes in the NFL, and I think there's this misnomer out there that they don't have, confidence issues, and they don't have tough days, and they don't struggle, mentally. That couldn't be further from the truth, because it's the ultimate pressure on those guys.
No question, working with the NFL guys, Major League Baseball guys, top college athletes, but even the guys in the NFL, they're making a lot of money, and like you said, it makes it even more pressure. It makes everything is about their performance. Those teams couldn't care less whether they like you or not, whether you're a good person or not. It's all about your performance, right? With football, with any sport really, even the slightest decrement in performance, and there's 1,000 guys that want your spot, right? A
Right.
thousand women that want your spot in the WNBA. So it's a total misnomer. They struggle with it, and it's also a misconception of confidence. The idea that confidence means that you always got it together, that you always feel like you're going to win and you're going to perform well and all that kind of stuff. That's really not what confidence is, right? Confidence is more about, when things are tough, I still believe in myself, but there's no guarantees out here. I'm gonna
Yeah.
put in the best effort I can for myself, for my family, for my teammates, for my coaches, and whatever happens, because everybody you go up against, they practice too. They lift
Right.
weights, right? They do the drills, they do the plyometrics, the training. everybody's trying to beat each other, and it's a tough world out there. But the confidence comes from being able to still feel you can do it when things are really tough and really difficult.
Right, right. That's such a great point. I'm glad you made that point for us and drove that home. I read an article that disturbed me about a year ago that talked about the rise in suicides among college athletes. And it really, really bothered me. How do we get our young people to come to us, to come to someone when they really need help? Because as you mentioned earlier, NIL, the family now leaning on you as an 18-year-old. I mean, we know 25-year-old guys that can't handle millions of dollars.
No
Now we're
question.
asking 17 and 18-year-olds to do it. What kind of pressure point must that be? So, talk to us a little bit about finding help, finding resources either on campus or maybe it's a guidance counselor in high school. Maybe dad's not around or mom's not around. Gotta have somebody to talk to help you find the support you need before it's too late.
Exactly. And I think the good news is I think there's more resources for mental health for athletes and for students in general than there's ever been. We still need more. I still don't think it's enough, but it's there for the most part. But the bad news is what do when we're training them to be athletes, it's, fight through pain,
Right.
don't be soft, be hard and tough and aggressive and competitive. And that is hard to let go of that and to be vulnerable, right? And to admit that you need some help and that you need some support from somebody and that you don't have it all together and that you're kind of falling apart a little bit. So everything they've been taught as athletes runs counter to getting help for mental health issues, right? And so they're really, at a disadvantage that way. And I think what has to happen is we have to model that for them. Like we have to, as parents and as people that support them, coaches and everybody, we have to model good kind of mental health behavior and getting help when you need it. We have to show them that that's the way to go. And then be them. We have to encourage them. And again, if your student athlete is at a college, almost every college has a counseling center now. You know,
Wow.
and
Nice.
and yeah, almost every college. I've worked at a lot of college mental health facilities. I work with New Jersey Institute of Technology athletes. There's a college counseling center, and at the big schools, like at a Power Five school, almost every athletic department has like at least a mental health like liaison to the counseling center,
Right.
or they even have their own counselors just for the athletes. Now, you don't rarely ever see that at the high school level, but at the high school, I work at a high school. I work at Montclair
Mhm.
High School, and that's my job is to work with mental health issues with our students, athletes, regular students, everybody. And we're there, and but I think even at the high school level, kids are sometimes reluctant. I think kids are more open these days than they were when we were coming up. So things
Sure.
have gotten better. There's less of a stigma to it, but it's still tough. And there's cultural issues. I think it's a little bit more difficult for students of color,
Yep.
to approach someone like myself for help. They might not think that you really understand where they're coming from, which is understandable.
Yep.
And so there's barriers to it that we have to break down. That's why it's so important to have diversity in our profession and in our school systems and our universities, because we want everybody to feel like they belong.
Right, right. You happen to belong to an exceptional community in Montclair, but there are many high schools that don't even have,
Mm.
you know, psychologists in the building anymore. They've gotten rid of them many, many years ago. It's a blessing that you're in the building. So, Doc, before I let you go, just tell me a little bit about, what you see and your experience with your kids in terms of the value added from athletic competition and basically the metaphor for life that competitive sports is.
Yeah, I think it's been a huge positive force in my children's development. Our oldest son, plays college Division 3 for lacrosse and football for some period. And then our two daughters who are in high school, they play basketball and run track a little bit and do a little volleyball. And they're not planning to play in college, but it's still been overall a good experience. People don't realize it's not just about being good at the sport and being successful and winning games and getting scholarships and that kind of thing. It's also about the connections that you make to people,
Sure.
right? That your teammates sometimes become friends for life. Kevin Richburg, one of my, friends for life that I met through football and, in fifth grade through high school. So there's the connection, which is super important. And there's also all the other things that we've touched upon a little bit. How do you build confidence? How do you
Right.
stay focused? How do you set goals and then kind of hammer out a plan and then, follow it through every day? And how do you develop that mental toughness of doing things you don't feel like doing, but
Sure.
it's good for you, I think sports have had all those positive effects on my kids. But there's also the real world of sports. There's other real world issues. My son had to deal with some racism because he was a black quarterback. And had
Right.
a coach that was racist for all intents and purposes. Tried to limit him. He had to deal with that. And my daughters have had some subpar experiences too in some cases, but I think overall it's been a positive for them, and they've enjoyed it. And there's many things, it's also it's been good for our family, right? It's like it's something that you do together that's positive. And in today's world where, they could sit on a screen all the time and, kind of waste their time doing that, I think they're a lot better off, right? Out there playing and practicing and doing those things and spending time with other people than being on a screen all day.
No doubt. No doubt. I was joking with my wife the other day. We could drive down our street 80 miles an hour and not have to worry about hitting a kid
Nope.
because they're all inside. So I'd love to see them back outside playing and, pick up basketball, touch football. Remember that? These kids don't even know what that is.
They have no conception. And it's one of the things when I'm coaching young guys in basketball, like they never play pickup.
Right.
They never spontaneously. Everything is arranged. Everything
Right.
and like simple things that you would just take for granted. And by the way, even when they do watch sports on screens, they watch highlights. They don't watch the process of a whole game, right?
Right.
They don't watch what those guys do and those gals do to get to that point where they can make that highlight, right?
Yep.
So I mean, it's real life experience, in person is a valuable thing, and sports really, gives them that opportunity still, unlike
Oh,
a lot of other things.
yes, indeed. Well, Dr. Ben, thanks so much for joining me today, man. I really appreciate your input. It's incredibly insightful and so helpful to many, many parents out there that are going through the struggle right now. So, hey, stay strong, my friend. You're almost at the end.
I I'm getting there. I'm getting there, but I appreciate the encouragement because I need every bit of it.
Yes, indeed, you do. I'm sure you do. Well, we will definitely stay in touch with you because
Yeah.
there are always issues to talk about around this topic. And we would love to get your insight in the future, Ben.
Oh, anytime, Mark, you let me know.
All right. Thanks so much, my friend. Have a wonderful day.
You too.
Thanks.
All right. Bye bye.
Bye bye.